New figures out today confirm Newcastle as the largest coal export port in the world, shipping out 89 million tonnes of the black gold each year. The industry earns billions and employs thousands. But the problem is that the coal companies can't load it onto ships fast enough, and the 14 companies involved are at loggerheads with the minister about the solution. They want to sign long-term contracts for the exclusive use of the port, promising in turn to spend more on loading facilities. But the minister won't agree.
What it does is send out to the world a signal that the port of Newcastle is closed and that you can't ship coal out of this port for the next 10 years using the existing infrastructure.
Mr Tripodi has rejected the outcomes of Nick Griner's report into the issue and seems determined to broker his own solution, keeping the port open for new players like the Chinese who want to set up coal operations in the future.
While it may not suit the interests of the current coal producers, it suits the interests of the Hunter Valley. It suits the interests of the people who rely on that investment to get jobs into the future. And that's why we're holding a hard line on this.
A group of 6 coal companies is building a third loader at Kooragang, and Port Waratah Coal is making some improvements to its capacity as well. But with billions of dollars to be made, none of the existing players seem willing to give up any ground in the long-term negotiations. Paul Lobb, NBN News.
It's been on the drawing board since the early 1990s, and today the first stage of the Weekleys Drive interchange opened to traffic. The overbridge is part of the $52 million project, eliminating 3 sets of traffic lights on the New England Highway. But a group of nearby residents are furious the RTA didn't extend the work zone to include a dangerous intersection just 1 kilometre away, where the highway meets Avalon Drive.
What needs to be done is that we need traffic lights, because we're going to have the same problem as we had at South Seas Drive. Somebody's going to be killed.
Anne McDonald says there are about 60 homes in the Avalon estate.
The main issue that I see is actually getting out onto the road, whether it be turning to Maitland or turning to Newcastle, with the traffic doing 90 k's an hour. That's a real problem for us.
There's also a bus stop on the wrong side of the highway, and without traffic lights, children's lives are at risk.
That's just totally unsafe. There's nothing on the other side of the road. They've put a bus stop sign there, but that's it. Children still have to cross 4 lanes of highway.
Maitland MP Frank Terenzini today said a 60-kilometre zone will remain in that area until construction finishes on the Weekleys Drive interchange to slow traffic down on the New England Highway. He added the RTA will consult with the community to find a safe solution for the Avalon Drive intersection. Jane Goldsmith, NBN News.
Here to reach out to young people under the age of 25 who are just struggling with the onset of mental illness. It's a very informal, friendly place where young people can come.
For Bob Baldwin, getting his multicoloured head shaved for charity certainly was a laughing matter.
The little bit of humility we have today is nothing to what the people that have prostate cancer and breast cancer go through, so we're just happy to do our bit to help.
Although Craig Bowman didn't appear thrilled about losing his locks.
Well, unfortunately there's a mirror in front of me and I can see what I look like and I can see what Bob looks like, which is even worse.
The Port Stephens Polly's sacrifice raised $10,000. Half the money will go to the Tomaree Breast Cancer Support Group, which is dedicated to making life easier for the peninsula's breast cancer patients.
we're really a basically grassroots help group. So we drive them into Newcastle for their chemo and their radiation and their medical appointments. If they're living alone, we get their lawns mowed or their houses cleaned.
The other half will be spent on prostate cancer commercials and donated to Port Stephens support groups.
Prostate cancer is one of those diseases where we need to lift the level of awareness because it's an insidious disease. Often you don't have symptoms.
Madeline Bond, NBN News.
Our emphasis here is upon community and upon industry, and we could not tell the story without the huge involvement of our volunteers, and they've been absolutely wonderful.
Like many of us, these people have high-pressure jobs and fast-paced lives. They're all mental health professionals, so you'd hope at least they'd know how to keep their heads together.
I try and hang out at the beach a lot by going for walks or being in the ocean or just going and reading a really nice book and just trying to be calm and be in the moment, really.
I think a good dose of sunshine, fresh air and connection with water.
I guess I'm pretty lucky in some respects because I write music and I've always found that that's a really good way to express things that maybe are a little bit difficult to talk about to people. It's sort of can be a really sort of cathartic process.
It's all good advice. The key message is to take the time to think about your mental health.
One of the problems is, as soon as we talk about mental health, people often automatically think about mental illness. But when we're talking about mental health, we're talking about that positive concept of social and emotional well-being.
Having good mental health helps us cope with the stresses of life.
Especially when you're leading very busy lives and you're trying to get kids off to school or you're working in a high-pressured job, you can always think of things being more important than your own sort of social and emotional well-being. And so people can often then slip into, habits where they're not appreciating the things that they have in their life and they're not taking time for themselves first before others.
We can probably all relate to that. So what's the answer? How do we maintain good mental well-being? Mental and physical health are closely linked. A good diet and exercise crucial. Having retired from football, Andrew Johns is more active than ever. Physical activity a big part of his treatment program for bipolar disorder.
A lot of it revolves around being in the ocean, surfing. When I'm not doing that, exercising as much as possible. Doing running, whatever, just trying to wear myself out. But I find if I'm active, then I've got a healthy mind.
Having solid connections to others, family and friends is also important to maintaining good mental health.
For me, I know that it's maintaining a good network of friends.
Getting involved, participating in life is another tool, as is finding that elusive work-life balance. For instance, knowing when it's time to turn out the office lights and go home.
You are tempted to stay at work all day and even into the evening, but I try and make sure I don't do that anymore.
Just having that work-life balance and taking some time out for yourself.
Mental health campaigner and radio broadcaster Craig Hamilton is striving to embrace all points, and he's characteristically eloquent in summing it all up.
We've all got good mental health until we take our eyes off the ball and treat it and take it for granted. And there's no one who can better personify that than me, because I took it for granted. I thought it'll always be there.
Starting the day at 6 under, Inverell's Brett Druitt had a 2-shot lead in front of Sydney's Denny Ann, who threatened to make up the deficit early. A birdie followed for Ann, then a bogey, while Druitt held par on the front 9 to win what would be his last junior tournament.
Had a good round on Wednesday and it's all clicked, so just pretty happy with that.
The leaders stuck together as Sydney's Jessica No defended her title in the girls' event, doing her international career no harm at all.
After graduating school, I'll be turning pro, playing tour from European or Japan or something like that.
And Charlestown's Jake Higginbottom held out Sydney's Ricky Cato to win the 14 boys. For others, it was a tough day at the office in more ways than one. Adam McIlrick, NBN News. If Paul Perry needed any convincing, Newport was ready for a trip south. It came last weekend in the Metropolitan. The mud running 50-1 shot relished the wet conditions, and should Melbourne turn on the same sort of weather, the Perry stable has plenty to look forward to.
Caulfield Cup Saturday week, it'd be nice to run into that with a nice lead into the Melbourne Cup, and hopefully he does get a run, but if he don't, we'll just have to find another avenue.
The Moonee Valley and Geelong Cups are the other options. As for jockey, Perry looks like sticking with champion apprentice Peter Wells, who collected his first Group 1 win on the grey.
It's hard taking him off. He raced so well for him, so probably him at the moment, I'd say.
Fellow Newcastle trainer Chris Lees has sought the experience of Glenn Boss to pilot Boom filly Samantha Miss in the Cox Plate.
He's given me every indication that he'll get down to the 47.5 or close enough, and he's a great big race rider, and it's certainly encouraging to have a rider like him on in a big race.
The 3-year-old justified her spot in the Weight for Age Classic following last Saturday's win in the Flight Stakes. The come-from-behind win ensuring a clean sweep in the Princess Series, the first horse to do so in 16 years. But now comes the real test.
She's coming out of her comfort zone of racing against her own age and sex. She's taking on the big boys in a race like the Cox Plate, so it's a huge ask, but I feel that she's deserved of a chance in it.
Samantha Miss leaves for Melbourne tonight. Adam McIlrick, NBN News.
Police descended on Spinnaker's Leisure Park following last night's fatal shooting. Just before 5 o'clock, 2 officers from Belmont Station were called to the park to investigate a domestic dispute. But it wasn't long before the routine job turned into a deadly standoff when a man aged in his 40s allegedly lunged at police wielding a knife. Officers used capsicum spray as they struggled to subdue the man, but when that didn't work, the policeman drew his weapon. Witnesses say they heard 3 gunshots. A critical incident team has been called in to investigate.
The homicide squad will be involved in that investigation, along with an oversight by the Professional Standards Command.
Neighbours identified the victim as Mick and have been shocked by the violent events.
It was quite pleasant, never caused any problem as far as we knew.
The officer involved returned to the scene today, helping to recreate the moments leading up to the shooting. The incident has reignited calls for frontline police to be equipped with tasers.
And the tasers really should be in every car. So in every situation, a police officer has access to them.
A sentiment the Police Association echoes.
And I can't comment about the specific incidents of last night. But the Police Association's view, our view, has always been that tasers need to be with frontline police.
Madeline Bond, NBN News. It's called the Walk of Pride. For the 4th year, people affected by mental illness walked through the heart of Newcastle to raise awareness of the issue and erase the stigma surrounding it.
A lot of people don't understand that mental illness is not a choice. It's something that a lot of people live with.
Today's march was led by Catherine Bennett, who's been diagnosed with a borderline personality disorder and complex post-traumatic stress. In 3 weeks, the remarkable woman will walk 1,000 kilometres to Melbourne.
I wanted to walk somewhere. I needed to go somewhere without running away. Something to show that it's possible to do something major, even with mental illness.
She's also hoping to raise $50,000 for the Hunter branch of mental health organisation ARAFMI. And Catherine won't be making the journey alone. Her faithful pooch Prudence will be with her every step of the way. Madeline Bond, NBN News.
Josh Blair is the elder statesman, if you like, of this trio, training with the redhead pair through winter and spring for next Sunday's Coolangatta Gold. Kyle Garrett has done Surf Lifesaving's ultimate torture test before, as has Brendan Ross, and both acknowledge it's about beating the 46-kilometre course, not each other.
Someone I've always sort of looked up to, as well as Josh. Definitely you want to get out there and race him, but at the same time, if I'm next to him, I'll be stoked to be there.
We wonder if he thought so today, this board training Merriweather style. For Garrett, the race is made harder through injury. He's already toiling with troublesome knees, but he's hell-bent on bettering his 2006 result, in which he finished 14th.
Hopefully when I cross the line, I'll be able to feel pretty satisfied that I've done it again and I've conquered a few little goals that I've wanted to achieve in the sport.
There's plenty riding on the outcome. Injuries aside, it remains a tough way to start this year's surf sports season, which for Garrett at least does not include the National Ironman Series.
I wouldn't mind just sitting back for a season and just enjoying going around in the local stuff and state and Aussies and see how that goes. So hopefully that'll freshen me up, but next year I definitely want to have another crack at Nutrigrain Series.
Every day, new tags and scrawled messages are appearing in Lake Macquarie on everything from bins to power poles. Local police say complaints about vandalism in Boolaroo, Spears Point and Warners Bay are on the rise.
You get one person putting graffiti on your wall and they're trying to outdo each other and it just goes from there and it gets worse.
Last night, police charged a 19-year-old Boolaroo man and two 18-year-olds from Katara South and Wallsend for allegedly graffitiing a service station, carpet store, Domino's Pizza and an employment agency. They'll appear in Belmont Court at the end of the month. A 15-year-old Macquarie Hills boy and a 16-year-old boy from Eaglevale, also caught, will be dealt with under the Young Offenders Act.
Sounds like the police are doing their job, aren't they? So, they've got to keep it up.
Police haven't ruled out further arrests. Penny Evans, NBN News. "40 years ago, the Williamtown RAAF base was given freedom of entry into the city of Newcastle. Today, about 200 officers and service personnel took up that right, marching along Wharf Street, swords out and drums beating, before an official salute in front of the Lord Mayor. That came just ahead of the Matara Grand Parade, a slightly less formal display. The number of visitors attending the 9-day carnival has been slightly down this year, but organisers insist it hasn't lost its relevancy.
The first couple of days with the weather were a bit scary for us, but since the sun's come back out, it's been gorgeous.
At the other end of the foreshore, the Maritime Centre certainly wasn't struggling for numbers. Hundreds keen to see the exhibitions, albeit not quite finished, on the museum's first day at anchor as part of the Maritime Festival.
A morning mist over Morpeth only got heavier as the first group hit the Hunter. The long course contenders disappearing within seconds for the 1.5 kilometre swim. Nathan Stewart from Redhead emerged first and, despite trouble in the transition, held his nerve to keep his lead. Batto Bay's Chris Dimitriev had plenty to do as the cycle leg wound through Duckenfield. And it was here the lead groups in both races crossed paths. While Stewart fell back for a moment in the mid-distance, Boyd Conrick increased his lead on the shorter course, enjoying a 1-minute buffer at the transition, only to have it wound back by Brian Keane. In third was Maitland's Gareth Bannon, and that's how it would finish for him. But when Conrick crossed the line, the race had already been won by the Irishman.
Yeah, I didn't really have any answers for him when he came past me with about 2 or 3 kilometres to go.
Talk about luck of the Irish, this just his third triathlon and all of them wins.
I've competed in the 3 sports previously, so I know what it takes to compete at them, but it's trying to put them together, the art of triathlon as such, and that's what I'm trying to get right at the moment.
The women's mid-distance was thrown open when former winner Lisa Marangon pulled out injured in the run leg, while in the men's, Dimitriev squared things up with Stewart, who finished second.
Me and Nath go a long way back and we've had some good battles over the years, so yeah, it's always good to get one up on him. He's beaten me here before, but today it's my day.
Newcastle's traffic and transport issues are being scrutinised in a number of ways. At the third meeting of the CBD Task Force today, in a Hunter Development Corporation report, and now in Council's City Centre Traffic and Transport Study. The Lord Mayor says it's needed to closely examine the issues the city is likely to face in the coming decades.
We want to fill in the gaps. We want to make sure that this is a holistic study that covers all aspects of the area.
The study will add to information gathered in today's task force meeting to see what the options are for increasing CBD parking, improving traffic flow into the city and opening up access to the Honeysuckle precinct. The study will take approximately 4 months to complete.
I hope we get an overall view of what's needed in terms of parking, transport, both public and private, rail and bus, taxi operation for the city.
The task force will release a findings report of its 4 meetings on the 14th of November. Lucy Wilson, NBN News.
Almost 6 years ago, bushfires ripped through the village of Abernathy, destroying 13 homes and taking the life of Sydney man Ronald Gillette, who died when his car was overrun by flames. In 2004, the coronial inquest into the blaze blamed an unidentified arsonist for starting the fire near the Cessnock Showground. However, local man Gary Price wasn't satisfied and advertised for information on the fires, offering a reward up to $20,000. His inquiries prompted the fresh investigation. A former Cessnock couple answered his ad. Today they gave evidence about a conversation they say they overheard on a UHF radio on the morning of the blaze. Council assisting the Rural Fire Service grilled both Ben Garbett and Natasha Clark about the radio conversation they say was between former friend Brendan Hoken and his girlfriend Candice about protecting Hoken's mother's house from a bushfire. Both insisted to the court the reward wasn't a motivating factor in coming forward all these years later, saying they believe Mr Hoken lit the blaze. When pressed, Mr Garbett denied making up the radio conversation. If that's what you think, I know what I heard. I wish I had recorded it. No family of the dead man, Ronald Gillette, attended today's hearing, although the council, appearing on behalf of the Rural Fire Service, offered condolences to everyone involved in the tragedy. The inquest continues tomorrow. Penny Evans, NBN News.
Ozpac Resources recently won the Applied Technology of the Year award for a process that's put it on the global stage. Starting with mined ilmenite, they use what's usually a waste product to make a pigment that's used in the manufacture of everything from paints to cosmetics.
It's also a dream come true for me. There's lots of years of design and hard work gone into it.
It's all done from this plant in Newcastle, where a team of 20 engineers, including manager John Winter, work around the clock to produce 3,000 tonnes of titanium dioxide every year. And as airline technologies improve, so too does their place in the market.
The demand for titanium is going up. For example, these new A380 aircraft have got 146 tonnes of titanium in them.
Today's shareholders attempted to wrap their heads around the complicated process, which is also environmentally friendly.
I believe seeing is believing. You take lots of photos and write lots of articles, but it's good to have everybody here to see what they've invested in.
Lucy Wilson, NBN News.
A city awash, lives in chaos. The June long weekend storm of last year showed our vulnerability to the elements. Emergency services were quickly at work, but it's hoped the new flash flood warning detection equipment will help us be more responsive.
The system will help improve communication from the Bureau of Meteorology to the various combat agencies that are responsible for responding to an emergency situation, and also inform the media so the community can be better informed.
Council has called tenders for the system, 10 rain gauges and 2 water level meters to be strategically located around the city.
We'll actually automate that information from the collection sites and feed that back into the system and flow on through to Sydney. So the operators in the Sydney Centre will be able to see firsthand what's happening on the ground.
The project has been years in the planning, even preceding last year's devastating weather event. It's being funded through a state government grant of $200,000, with the maintenance tab to be picked up by the Commonwealth.
When it comes to rubbish, Australians are almost in a field of their own. Only the US throws out more household waste. Unfortunately, among the junk are many prehistoric computers like this one, which end up in landfill and spoil the environment.
Well, computers are made up, the insides and the circuit boards have got things like lead and arsenic and mercury and cadmium in them, and they have the potential to leak out into the environment, into the surrounding water systems.
The spread of toxic electronic waste, or e-waste, is a rapidly expanding problem in Australia, particularly when you consider the recent boom in electronic goods. But Newcastle City Council is offering to take it off our hands free of charge in an annual recycling event. This year's will be next Saturday, the 25th of October, at the City Council's Wallsend Depot on Turton Road.
We're going to be accepting things like printers, fax machines, scanners, all household quantities, so no commercial quantities. We won't be accepting white goods or stereos, but all the other material will get recycled down the Central Coast and hopefully made into other electronic equipment.
Another nasty pest for the environment are batteries, but these new collection boxes will hopefully keep them clear of our household bins.
There's going to be one at the City Library, one at the Wallsend Library and one also at the Community Greening Centre at Katara.
Lucy Wilson, NBN News.
To be called Twilight Aqua, it's a triathlon minus the cycle leg, a run, swim, run along the Honeysuckle and Foreshore precincts every Wednesday night.
The 6 aquathon events in Newcastle here will actually be talent identification events, and they'll be looking to find talented swimmers and runners and hopefully turn them into Olympic triathletes in 2012.
It's a 6-kilometre course in total, and Redhead's Boyd Conrick is among the confirmed starters, but says it's at a national level more events are needed.
It's been disappointing in the last 6 or 7 years. We haven't had a professional domestic short course circuit, and I think Australia's feeling the effects of that at the top level, at the Olympic level.
Yesterday's Maitland Triathlon, in which he finished second, was his first short course race since recently returning from America, pipped in the final 2Ks of the run leg.
I'll definitely be working on my run speed. I used to be, I think, a pretty fast runner, and I've lost that in the last 4 or 5 years since I started doing Ironman distance events, but now I'm back concentrating on the shorter stuff.
Fellow Redhead triathlete Nathan Stewart also finished the Morpeth event in second, but over the longer course, in which he said he suffered in the cycle leg.
I've had a pretty late start to the season on the bike, and that's usually my best leg, and I'm just not riding well at all. So hopefully the next few weeks I'll sort of hit me straps.
Adam McIlrick, NBN News. It's an amateur sport, but they play like professionals. For a start, the boats are worth up to $400,000 each. And while they provide the muscle, the skill is in the skiing.
Events like this, just gotta look good. Get out there, there's a lot of people watching. This is fun.
Sydney's Chris Stout is reigning world champion in the F2 class. And just like 4-time world champ Anne Proctor loves racing in Newcastle because, put simply, there's always a crowd, and what a backdrop.
In places like this is where you can see how hard the skiers work and how skillful the skiers have to be, and the drivers and the observers too, to keep them going.
And don't they go? Depending on conditions, they reach speeds of up to 160 kilometres an hour. Rough is good while busy is a bonus, as they use Newcastle to prepare for next year's world titles.
Congested, which is what we want, because that's the conditions that we're going to run in Belgium.
Ellie Barner's Daniel Cotton hopes to be there.
Won the Grafton Bridge to Bridge 4 times overall, and I've been US national champion back in the 90s.
But he's yet to be world champion. Chasing one of 3 spots in the Aussie team, he'll race the next 7 qualifying events, and if officials get their way, rounds 5 and 6 could return by the end of summer. Adam McIlrick, NBN News.
It may have been dead and buried 2.5 years ago.
We've listened to the people, and rail service on the rail line will continue into Newcastle.
But now there are fresh calls to cut the rail line at Newcastle West. GPT Group's plans include transforming Wickham Station into a major interchange, while they want to replace the rail line into Newcastle with a long green strip of parkland. GPT says for their $650 million redevelopment of the Hunter Street Mall to be successful, they need to improve connections between the foreshore and the mall. The development company has spent $100 million buying up properties around the mall, but now they say if the state government doesn't approve the changes to the rail corridor, the development is not expected to go ahead.
For a developer to effectively hold a gun to the government's head over this without even considering the community is very disappointing. I think it's misguided, and at the most I think it's arrogant.
And while the Hunter Business Chamber supports GPT's plan, it's polarising residents.
I can't believe that some people are going to give up $650 million development for Newcastle that's well overdue just to be able to get rail from here to Wickham when there's a free bus anyway.
Wouldn't be a good idea. That would be upset too many people.
I think it'd be a good plan. I don't think we really need it going all the way to Newcastle Station.
Jane Goldsmith, NBN News.
A few quick pen strokes sealed Hunter Infrastructure Alliance's multi-billion-dollar submission. The group wants the federal government to spend around $4 billion in the Hunter on what it calls nationally significant projects. The money would come out of the Commonwealth's $20 billion Infrastructure Australia Fund.
We, of course, are competing, I guess, for want of a better word, with all of the other states for that funding, but we are confident that the projects that are included in our submission are sound from an economic driver perspective.
The projects have been split into 4 basic areas: port, roads, communication and rail. The Alliance wants a rail freight bypass of Newcastle built to improve freight times in and out of the port. Regarding roads, they want access to the F3 improved, to Branxton, Sydney's M2 and M7 and to Raymond Terrace. The Alliance also wants broadband access improved and a fast train link between Sydney and Newcastle. The projects, they say, will generate jobs and boost the nation's economy.
A lot of these things aren't new. The Hunter's been very good at trying to send a message to Canberra and to Sydney over many, many years of the potential that can be realised with infrastructure investment up here. And we think that these projects stack up well in terms of their national significance.
The application will be submitted tomorrow. Madeline Bond, NBN News. They don't move, talk or have a joystick, so it can be difficult to get kids interested in rocks. Today, the Maitland DPI Minerals Office did its bit to enthuse the next generation of fossickers, including free take-home souvenirs.
It's certainly badly needed. We have a big skill shortage right across the geosciences these days.
International Earth Sciences Week is all about bringing home the role of rocks and the people that dig them up. For instance, this is how much coal it takes to brew the average cup of coffee or charge a mobile phone.
By and large, what we want to do is just get people to have a better understanding of the role of earth sciences in their everyday lives.
You never know, the next big find could be right here in the Hunter. Penny Evans, NBN News.
The only chemical these bodybuilders use is fake tan.
We actually drug test every single competitor before every competition.
Ellamore Vales, Lance Jensen and Lisa Allen from Cardiff Heights compete in bodybuilding associations which judge the natural form, where bulky isn't necessarily best.
Muscle definition but still keeping the feminine side. So we wear sparkly jewellery and high heels and the long nails and we pose with fanned fingers. So.
And it's when they're posing you see just how lean they are. Both say they are not shy, and a good thing too.
I'm probably a little bit of an extrovert, so getting on stage in what is pretty close to your underwear is something that most people probably find a little bit intimidating.
38-year-old Lance has, in the past fortnight, won state and national open titles. Next month in America, he'll go for the world crown, and what a comeback it would be after a 4-year break. 33-year-old Lisa works at a city gym, and while she's spent most of her life around weight rooms, this is just her second year of competition. But in winning Ms Sydney 2008, she too has earned a world title shot.
At this point, I'm not feeling nervous, I'm excited, and I'm looking forward to the end of the diet cycle. So.
Adam McIlwright, NBN News. Much like his preparation for this weekend's 14-hour triathlon-style fundraiser, Eddie Cross has had to overcome the odd speed bump in his life.
I do stop and take stock of where I was, as in the coma in the hospital with my children feeding me.
That was after suffering a brain injury while playing Aussie rules 2 years ago, and while sport was a setback, it would also be his saviour.
And he's now proven that neurogenesis is obtained very quickly through exercise, the rebirth of new brain cells, so it's all good, and I'm back to 98% recovery.
He credits charity Leapfrog Ability for much of that progress, and in wanting to give something back, his plight has caught the attention of former world champion cyclist Anoni Wood, who'll ride the 30k cycle leg.
I'm pretty confident I'll make the distance, but at the moment I retired a couple of weeks ago and haven't been doing a lot of training since then, so hopefully Eddie doesn't tear my legs off too much.
He'll have a job doing so. Anoni, who was born in Newcastle and has recently returned, has numerous credits to her name, including Commonwealth Gold and Silver. A 6 a.m. start, the money they raise on Saturday will be spent on hunter programs for children with disabilities and the Brain Injury Clinic.
As you'll see us swimming around the harbour, riding all around the city, Beaumont Street, Derby Street, so when you're having a coffee, put $10 in the tin, or $1,000.
Adam McIlwright, NBN News.
With Christmas looming, it's a welcome lump sum of $1,400 to single pensioners and $2,100 to couples.
It's probably the sort of payment that will allow them to get something that they've been wanting for a long, long time and never been able to afford.
But the Lake Macquarie branch of the National Seniors Group is calling for increased regular payments, particularly the single-aged pension of $275 a week.
The pension itself needs to be adjusted on a permanent basis.
Hunter real estate agents are expected to be busier. The increase in the first home buyers grant added impetus for those in the market.
I thought it was good news. I think it's going to be good for all the first homeowners. The market's gone crazy and just can't afford anything these days.
And with the grant for those building a new home increased to $21,000, the Housing Industry Association predicts about 700 new dwellings will be built across the Hunter over the next 9 months.
I think it's been a tremendous stimulus, Jane, that we're seeing a kickstart, and housing should really start to recover, the project housing market at least.
Jane Goldsmith, NBN News.
The inquest was reopened by Deputy State Coroner Carl Milovanovich to examine allegations of a major cover-up by the RFS over the bushfire that killed Ronald Gillette. During the third day of proceedings, the court heard details of a phone call Gary Price made to RFS headquarters in 2004. A transcript of the conversation recorded Mr Price saying, "I found out yesterday that Cessnock Rural Fire Service lit the fire in Abernathy. I want Phil Koberberg to know I'm going to F over the New South Wales Rural Fire Service the way they've F'd me over." Counsel assisting the RFS, John Agius, asked the Cessnock resident, whose home was not among the 13 destroyed by fire, "What is behind your vendetta, Mr Price?" He responded, "I don't have a vendetta. My intention has always been to find out the truth of what happened that day. The fact the RFS risked their lives to save my house is unbelievable." Gary Price lost 178 pet birds in the fire, which were housed in an aviary at the rear of his property. Today, Mr Agius suggested Mr Price blamed the RFS for the birds' deaths and said he was transferring his feelings of loss onto them. "You feel responsible and guilty, but you've shifted the responsibility onto the RFS," he said. Mr Price rebuffed the claims. The inquest continues tomorrow. Jessica Phyllis, NBN News.
Theo and Margaret Gumas held their final screening at the showcase in May. Ordered by the building's owner, developers GPT, they closed due to fire safety regulations, but more importantly to make way for the new Hunter Street Mall redevelopment. Now they're finding it hard to live with GPT's sudden ultimatum that the Newcastle rail line must go.
To hear the sadness of the news that won't go ahead and we don't have a business anymore, I find that very, very sad.
You could have still been here?
Yes, we could have still been here, yes. But it's a little bit late for that now.
Adding to the mall woes is the fact David Jones has declared it won't stay if the GPT development doesn't go ahead.
That was the anchor. And if a ship doesn't have an anchor, the city won't have it either.
While the state government has so far rejected GPT's plan to rip up the rail line from Wickham through to Newcastle, the Lord Mayor wants to find a resolution.
We've got a developer who's saying we'll spend $500 to $600 million. That's a lot of money. We shouldn't let that slip away.
The whole precinct is slowly dying and it needs an injection of something like GPT to revitalise it.
Jane Goldsmith, NBN News.
If you're wondering where the money from your electricity bill's been going, it's to projects like this. Energy Australia has invested $75 million building this new substation at Argenton.
It's our single largest investment in the Hunter so far. It brings with it a number of technologies that previously wouldn't have been available outside of a CBD.
The substation will provide a more reliable source of electricity to people living in northern Lake Macquarie and southern Newcastle once it's complete in February. And it's just one of the major projects the company is undertaking in response to its expanding customer base. Work has just begun on another substation at Adamstown. That project will cost $20 million and improve power supply to 20,000 homes in surrounding suburbs. All up, the company plans to spend $8.6 billion upgrading and building substations across the Hunter and Central Coast over the next 5 years.
That's one of the largest infrastructure programs in Australia.
But it's certainly coming at a cost. The work is adding an extra $2 a week to our electricity bill. Madeline Bond, NBN News.
If you've never heard of mounted horse games, you're not alone.
Australia's only just sort of picked it up in the last 5-10 years. Overseas it's been very big. I'm just sort of new to the sport in the last few years.
At just 23, Sean Thompson is already an established part of our 5-member national team, having competed at world events in Wales, Sweden and the US. Based at Vasey in the Hunter, the station hand says the sport involves a variety of challenges in and out of the saddle.
Jumping on, off, picking things up off the ground, bending poles. It's just all sorts of games.
To be held on Sydney's northern beaches, the World Mounted Games will see overseas teams offered a selection of Australian horses. Sean will have the advantage of saddling up a familiar Long Face, his working horse, Esky.
We've been together about 8 or 10 years through the pony club and the camp drafting and things like that, so yeah, we get on pretty well.
Thompson will look to form another great partnership a week after the event when he ties the knot with fiancée Karina. A win over the English would be a perfect early wedding present. Mitchell Hughes, NBN News. If you've ever had to ride the rails in the Lower Hunter over the past 40 years, chances are you've spent time on a rattler. Retired in June last year, train spotters from the Patterson Rail Motor Society were desperate to save the 600 class two-car diesel unit from the scrap heap.
Introduced in 1964, especially for the Hunter, and this one here particularly has been in the Hunter region ever since. So it's our train, it's part of the Hunter.
The volunteers will restore the train to its former glory, complete with an original paint job and kitchen facilities for its new life as a tour operator. In the beginning, tours will most likely stay confined to the region, but eventually the horizon's the limit.
Hopefully we might be able to go interstate later, hope to Queensland, Victoria, South Australia and possibly even Western Australia.
The Patterson Rail Motor Society hopes to have the Rattler back on track and ready to roll in 3 to 4 months. Mitchell Hughes, NBN News.
Walker Graziers Angus and Kirsty Gall came to Newcastle with high hopes for their wool clip. Their finer quality bales fetched good prices, but overall the market has tanked.
It's disappointing for the whole industry and for a lot of growers that put a lot of work in.
Just last month, the wool industry was enjoying a resurgence with prices up as much as 10%. At this week's Newcastle sales, the direction has been way down.
We're looking at across the board now somewhere between 15 and 20% on our September sale, depending on your style and micron.
Quality is high and there's demand for the finer wools especially. But money has evaporated and even a more competitive Aussie dollar can't save these sales.
A lot of the mills have sort of really closed up their books and they're sitting tight to see what happens. And all the way down the wool pipeline. We've got garment manufacturers, we've got yarn manufacturers who can't get a line of credit.
There are only 2 more sales for the year, both next month. Who knows what world fortunes will hold by then? Farmers will just continue doing what they do best, holding on to hope.
You just have to take every day as it comes and just be positive, I suppose.
Convicted arsonist and former RFS volunteer Brendan Hoken spent several months in jail after pleading guilty to lighting a fire in the Hunter Valley on October 15, 2002. During a coronial inquest in Newcastle today, he strongly denied any involvement in a separate blaze at Abernathy 4 days later, which claimed the life of a Sydney businessman. He said solicitor Greg Murray's version of what happened at the only time he was alone that day was untrue. Having left the RFS shed, you took the opportunity to light a fire. No, I did not, Hoken said. Mr Hoken also rejected another witness's claim that he used a CB radio to warn his partner about the fire and the threat that it represented. I was not on the radio whatsoever that day. Earlier, Cessnock resident Abe Martin told the court he saw 2 men loitering next to long grass near his home, with one apparently igniting the fire. He bent down and a couple of seconds later all hell broke loose. So it certainly looks suspicious to me, he said. Several more witnesses will be called upon as the inquiry continues. Jessica Phyllis, NBN News.
Driving a bus has become a risky business.
We've had a few incidents with drivers being abused as well as attacked.
Hunter Valley Buses is considering installing these plastic shields in vehicles, but want drivers to test them out first.
It's more about getting the driver's opinion, ensuring that they're comfortable with that type of security shield. If they're supportive of that, we definitely would be looking at retrofitting them within our fleet.
The move follows driver complaints about threats from passengers. The company could also fit out buses with two-way radio systems.
It has a duress feature on it, whereby if the driver is at risk, they would push the duress button. It would go back to cab charge office and we'd pick up a GPS location.
Drivers are behind the proposals.
These new screens should help, I'd say, but we definitely need something to be done, so this is a beginning for us.
But the Transport Workers Union wants more done to ensure driver safety.
They haven't, importantly, agreed to put security guards on the buses, and that was one of the things that we've asked for.
Madeline Bond, NBN News.
When it comes to rubbish, Australians are almost in a field of their own. Only the US throws out more household waste. Unfortunately, among the junk are many prehistoric computers like this one, which end up in landfill and spoil the environment.
Well, computers are made up, the insides and the circuit boards have got things like lead and arsenic and mercury and cadmium in them, and they have the potential to leak out into the environment, into the surrounding water systems.
The spread of toxic electronic waste, or e-waste, is a rapidly expanding problem in Australia, particularly when you consider the recent boom in electronic goods. But Newcastle City Council is offering to take it off our hands free of charge in an annual recycling event. This year's will be next Saturday, the 25th of October, at the City Council's Wallsend Depot on Turton Road.
We're going to be accepting things like printers, fax machines, scanners, all household quantities, so no commercial quantities. We won't be accepting white goods or stereos, but all the other material will get recycled down the Central Coast and hopefully made into other electronic equipment.
Another nasty pest for the environment are batteries, but these new collection boxes will hopefully keep them clear of our household bins.
There's going to be one at the City Library, one at the Wallsend Library and one also at the Community Greening Centre at Katara.
Lucy Wilson, NBN News.
Sitting for the HSC is one of the most stressful times in a young adult's life, with years of learning judged over a few short exams. Today, 16,400 business studies students were put to the test as the first HSC papers were rolled out.
It was actually quite hard, but yeah, I got through it.
Now that the first one's over, I feel a bit better, but it's still scary. Still have to go home and study for the next couple.
Most Year 12 students will sit for 6 exams over the next month. A record 67,931 students are undertaking the HSC this year. Almost half are studying a science course, while around 1/3 are enrolled in a history subject. But by far the most popular elective is mathematics, with 77% of students sitting the maths exam next week. Students at the Callaghan College Jesmond campus had this advice for their peers.
It's pretty easy for the stress to build up, but you've just got to balance you got to still have fun as well. You've got to go to the beach some days, study the others.
Put the time in, put the effort in, and you'll be fine.
The final HSC exam will be sat on the 13th of November. Madeline Bond, NBN News.
He's shown flashes of brilliance during his time at the Jets, but Edmundo Zura clearly hasn't impressed Gary Van Egmond.
He's still not providing what we want. It comes in short bursts here and there, and that's not good enough.
The coach's frustration was on show at training this morning, indicating the Ecuadorian's days in Newcastle could be numbered.
We've gone over it many, many times of what his role is, where he needs to be, what he needs to do with and without the ball, and it's not sinking in. So eventually something has to give.
On a brighter note, this was a sight for sore eyes. Joel Griffiths completed today's session, but both coach and player agree he won't play unless his hamstring is 100%.
It can't be 95%, it's got to be spot on, and I've had one before and that's what I had to do, and so I won't be playing if it's 99%.
His brother Adam is also racing to be fit.
Not completely confident, but we'll see tomorrow and hopefully I'll be playing on the weekend.
After missing the Socceroos clash with Qatar, Jade North will also test his fitness at training tomorrow before being cleared to captain the Jets against Melbourne on Saturday. Meanwhile, James Holland is back in Newcastle colours after a stint with the young Socceroos and is likely to face the Victory this weekend. Mitchell Hughes, NBN News.
Fullback's my preferred position, but I think that utility role is where I've been picked. Cameron Smith's the only other hooker, so mate, I'll be happy as long as I'm playing that 17 and having a run.